All right. So, I also have a new version of the document, the meteorites document that I was going over and working on just a moment ago. I will be posting that up at the site on the Facebook site.
Cool.
The Black Rock Observatory site, so that you guys can take a look at that again. It's pretty close to the same thing, although I added a few things here and there. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of talk about what I talk about when we're there, and I'll give you guys an overview, real quick about what I say, and then I'll let you guys ask any questions you might have. For the most part, I don't say all of this stuff to everyone. I improvise a lot. It comes out differently and in slightly different orders every time I do it, and people are moving and shifting around and looking at stuff. So a lot of times I'll get I'll talk about the compo, and people will move on to go look at the telescopes, and then I'll be talking about the slice, and people will come back or move on or whatever. So not everybody who comes through gets everything. On occasion, I have people come in and who are very interested and hang around for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and just listen to the entire spiel. And the last two festivals we were at, which was Lightning in a Bottle and Vertex, we actually had the telescopes outside the dome. And so I ended up inside the dome, welcoming people to the Black Rock Observatory. I told them a little bit about the Desert Wizards of Mars and the history of the Desert Wizards that we formed 3 years ago as a result of a Burning Man group here in Los Angeles, the LA League of Arts, wanting to do a burn here. And so we built a sculpture for Los Angeles for our burn that ended up being Equinox, and then stayed together because we had such a good time. And so we build scientific art projects, and our mission statement is to bring science to places where it isn't, namely art festivals and music festivals. And I talk about the domes and Greg's construction, the fact that they don't have any metal fasteners a little bit. And then usually while I'm talking about that stuff, I'm holding the big rock in my hand, and I will say, here, could you hand this and pass it around, and I'll talk about this in a minute as I tell them about that stuff, because the rock is almost 10 pounds, and it's, I like to say I give the rock to people for two reasons. First of all, because how often do you get to hold a 4.5 billion-year-old piece of metal in your hand from outer space? And second, because my arms get tired. And I'm seriously, like, I don't want to hold that thing all night. So anyway, okay, so let me just hit record here, and I will start up. So I start off by saying, hey, welcome to the Black Rock Observatory. Tell them about us, and then point them at the first big rock, which I'm handing around to people. If at all possible, I like to have the white light to show it off, because it's obviously everything's hard to see under the red lights. But when you're out at the burn, most of the time what you'll be doing with the rocks is standing in line or next to the line just outside the observatory dome, maybe 10 or 15 feet out, and maybe 20 feet out, whatever. You pick a spot, and at that point in time, you can do a little bit of the guardian work, which is asking people to turn off their white lights so they don't get night blindness when they're trying to look through the telescope, and make sure you use the red light for everything. So when you're doing this, make sure that you have a headlamp or a flashlight that's the red light, so that you can show off the rocks. Let me show you real quick what, in case you haven't already seen it. That is what our Campo del Cielo looks like. It's about 8.75 pounds, almost 9 pounds. It's almost pure iron. So when you hand it to people, they are generally shocked to discover how heavy it is compared to the size, um, which is where I make the joke, yeah, I don't want to carry it all night. That's why I'm giving it to you, because my arms get tired. It is 93% iron, almost pure iron. The other 7% is mostly nickel. There are trace amounts of other heavy metals in there, like cobalt and iridium. I put the other uh, metals in the document that I'll be sharing on Facebook or resharing on Facebook. So if you want to get that technical, you can. I don't usually. I just say cobalt and iridium. It's trace amounts, so it's not that much. It was formed. There are three kinds of meteorites. This is an iron meteorite. It was formed in the core of a meteoroid in the asteroid zone about 4.5 billion years ago. So it's the oldest thing that you will ever touch, because there isn't anything in our solar system that's older than that. And actually, when you look up at the sky, there's quite a few stars up there that are younger than that piece of metal. It's a meteoroid that is large enough that it has its own gravity. The heaviest metals sink to the middle and form a core, and then it has a rocky exterior to it. And what happened with this piece is something like that. It melted, it sank down. The metal would have been under such intense pressure from the outer core that it actually would have been molten or semi-molten. And at some point in time or another, it got into an accident and crashed into another piece of meteorite, or meteoroid rather, and was knocked out of its orbit. The crust was cracked, the iron was exposed to open space, and over millions and billions of years, it cooled very, very slowly and eventually hit Argentina about 4,500 or 5,000 years ago. It comes from a landing site in northern Argentina called the Campo del Cielo landing meteorite site. It's the largest meteorite site we've ever found, over 60 tons of material from this one specific site. It also has the largest, second largest single piece of meteorite, about 37 tons. The largest piece is from Uganda or Namibia or something. It's about 60 tons. But this entire site is actually larger than that. And it came down through the atmosphere, either in pieces before it hit the atmosphere, or broke up in the atmosphere, or a little bit of both, which I think is what it is actually a little bit of both, and landed over an area over 40 square miles. There are 25 or 26 impact sites, craters, that we already know about, and there are probably more that have been swallowed by the jungle over the last 4,500 years. So and landed 4,500 or 5,000 years ago. It was discovered by Western civilization in the 1500s. I shouldn't say discovered, but there was a Spanish governor in northern Argentina after the Spanish were colonizing in the 1500s, who heard about the native peoples there talking about this land of heaven, as they called it, or something similar to that, and that they made weapons and tools out of this metal. And so the Spanish, who were constantly on the quest for valuable stuff in the New World, went looking to see if this was some sort of magical metal or precious metals that they could use. The explorers at that expedition found iron and thought it was just worthless iron. And so they left it there. And it was pretty much not paid attention to for almost 200 years. In the late 1700s, there were two separate expeditions that went out and looked at it. They both also thought it was worthless iron, but the second one, just sort of hedging his bets, the Spanish explorer, sent a piece of it back to the Royal Society in London to have them look at, and they examined it and determined that it was in fact meteorite. So in the 1700s, that makes it one of the oldest meteorites that was ever recovered specifically for scientific study. So three very notable things about this, about the Campo del Cielo. It's the largest meteorite site ever found. It's got the second largest chunk that we've ever found, 37 tons, like I said. And it's like the size of a Volkswagen. It's huge. There's pictures of it on the internet if you guys want to go look it up. It's all rusty and nasty, but and then of course one of the earliest meteorites recovered for scientific purposes. So there are two more things about that meteorite that I share occasionally with people. One is that in 1990, a famous meteorite hunter whose name escapes me at the moment, Haag, something like that, anyway, tried to steal that chunk, the 37-ton chunk from Argentina, and got as far as like the docks where he was loading it under a shipping container when the Argentinian government stopped him and confiscated it back. And they put it back where it landed, like right near its landing site. Only now it's completely above the ground instead of buried, and there's a plaque, and it's a whole protected site. So we've recovered an enormous amount of material from Campo del Cielo. So pretty much every university and museum and private collector who wants some of this particular meteorite can get some. I have people ask me quite a bit how expensive it is. We got it at a discount because we bought it and the slice at the same time, along with 100 little pieces of meteorite that we gave as gifts to the kids from Kidsville the first year that we were out, when they came out to visit the meteorite, to visit the Black Rock Observatory. So we got a discount on it. I've seen meteorites roughly the same size and composition for between $1,500 to $2,500. I think we paid half that. So I have had people ask if it's radioactive. It's not, at least not to any degree that could possibly hurt you. I've had people ask if our hands like have been wearing it down because the texture is so interesting on the outside. It's very smooth and soft, and it's got those weird scoops and everything. No, it's almost pure iron. Our hands don't have the amount of abrasion possible to really do any kind of damage to the stone. We do get it dirty, and it gets sort of oily from the oil on our hands. Although not so much at Burning Man because that oil is pretty dry. Our hands are pretty dry, but we do clean it. So I've had people ask if they can lick it. The answer is yes. Tom is excited about somebody at some point in time having sex with it, which I don't know that that's ever going to happen, but I do tell people that people have done pretty much everything that they can do. People love to hold it. When you handle it, there are 3 or 4 different ways that it can sit in your hand very comfortably. My favorite one is to sit in my left hand. There's a spike on the back that sits basically right here, and your thumb fits right over the top of it, and it sits in your hand very nicely that way. But there's a bunch of different handholds. Yeah, so that's pretty much about it. It did come into the atmosphere more or less exactly the way it looks when you hand it to people. So you can tell people that it is pretty much identical to how it was floating in space before it came into the atmosphere. The only thing that I do point out is on the flat side or the scoop side, if you look at it, it doesn't show in that picture I just showed you, but if you look at it, it kind of looks like waves on the water. And the reason it looks like that is because it's literally waves. It's when it entered the atmosphere for that minute or so that it was traveling through the atmosphere, that it was a meteor, it punched into the atmosphere, obviously with a great deal of force because it's almost 10 pounds of metal, with all of the other 60 tons of mass that was coming through. And when meteors punch into the atmosphere, they create a compression wave in front of them because they're coming in at between 40 and 260,000 miles an hour. I mean, they're coming in fast, right? So what happens is the oxygen is compressed, and literally the air begins to burn around them from the compression, which causes heat and the oxygen in the atmosphere. And so that's what you see in the sky, is that streak. I have great fun pointing out to people that you've heard the stories about, oh, meteors burning up in the atmosphere and stuff. That's completely not true. Meteors do not burn up in the atmosphere because they're made out of metal and rock. Metal and rock don't burn. And the other thing is that they've been floating in outer space for billions of years. They are as close to 0 degrees Kelvin as iron can get, which is, I can't remember exactly. I looked it up at one point in time. It's like in the 10 range Kelvin. I mean, it's really cold, right? They've been out there for a long time. So, so they don't actually burn up. They stay very, very cold. But all of that heat and the pressure on the outside of the metal does soften just the bare outer skin of the metal a little bit, and all of that pressure over the top of it does a small amount of deformation, very small amount of deformation to it. So it does kind of look like waves in the metal, and that's because it's literally waves in the metal, just like air blowing over the ocean. The bigger waves that you see in it, or the bigger shapes, are actually from when it was molten iron and cooling to become solid iron out in space. So, so you point that out. So that's fun. The other cool thing that I only and I learn something new every time I go out with these rocks, or I figure out something new. I'm going to move on to the slice now because we have a great transition here. My transition is usually either at this point or I'm talking about the iron cooling over tens of millions of years. And I pull out the slice and I show them the slice. The slice is pure silver, basically in color. But let me share you a picture of that real quick. Where is it? There it is. Share screen. Okay. So this is the slice, and in it you can see the Whitmans patterns, and I'll talk about those in a second. You also notice, like, right around the edge, there's a slightly darker color. Most of it is this silver, these gray and silver color, but just around the edge, it's a slightly darker color. So the way this slice is formed is it's a piece of iron very similar to the Campo del Cielo meteorite that has been cut like bread on a diamond saw, sliced, and then polished and given an acid wash so that the patterns show up. So this is a cross section of the larger meteorite. And that dark edge, that very, very thin dark edge around the outside, is the amount of iron that's actually affected by its entry into our atmosphere. So as you can see, it's almost nothing, right? It's a very, very little. And the rest of it stays in the pattern that it was previous. So you'll remember that I said that iron meteorites form in the core of a very large meteoroid that's large enough to have gravity that can suck the iron down to the middle, and then the external crust of rock is providing pressure down on the core so that it becomes molten or semi-molten, and that it breaks up or break through an impact, and the iron is exposed to space and cools over tens of millions of years. When that happens, under those very specific circumstances, when iron and nickel cool over 10 to 20 million years, literally like 1 degree every million years or something. I mean, like, not million years, but every 100,000 years or whatever. Excuse me. The nickel and the iron form two specific alloys, the names of which I have never been able to remember, and it's not important, so don't worry about it. But those two specific alloys crystallize and form geometric patterns in the metal. And so that's what the Whitmans pattern is. That's what you're looking at here. It's literally ice crystals, like a snowflake of iron and nickel in the iron. And so people love that. And I approach that a couple of different ways. I'll often talk about that before I pull the piece out, so that I can tell them about the Whitmans patterns and tell them about what they would find if they cut open the big rock. And then I'll say, and I happen to have an example of that right here, and pull it out and show them. This is another example. This is especially if Tom, I gotta get on his ass and bug him about this. The slice needs polishing, and he said he was going to have it polished before you guys get to Burning Man. So hopefully he will. I'm going to get after him and make sure that he gets on that. But yeah, if it's unpolished, those patterns are much harder to see than they are in the picture, and you almost do need the white light. So that's fun to do if you're like over at Dome 1 or something away from the telescopes. You can really show that off. They're still visible under the red light, especially if it's polished, then they're easily visible. So that piece is from a meteorite called the Muonyon Alusta, and the way to remember that is cows, onions, fake fat. Okay? Cows go moo, and then onion, and then Alusta. You guys remember Alusta, that fake fat that got everybody sick in the potato chips a few years back? Maybe a decade or two ago. So it's moo, onion, Alusta. And that's not actually the perfect pronunciation, but it's as close as English speakers are going to get. It's a Scandinavian word. The Muonyon Alusta meteorite landed in a glacier about 1 million years ago. It's one of the oldest meteorite sites that we've actually ever found, because anything past a certain age, the meteorites are either buried so deep or have been broken up by erosion and time that the craters have vanished, and we don't see them anymore. So this one was in a glacier, lived through 4 ice ages, and whoops, meeting ends in 10 minutes. So I'll go quick.
Forgot about that.
And yeah, so and so this slice was discovered in the early 1900s in a glacier, and the reason it was found is because of global warming. The top of the glacier had melted far enough that they found. So global warming is not all bad, just mostly bad. So I showed them that, and then the last piece, or the last big piece that I show, is the piece. It's and big. It's about this big. It used to be square, but someone at LIB dropped it, and so now it's sort of triangular, and it's called a Pallasite. It's from a meteor called the Same-Chan meteorite, which was landed in Russia, and we don't actually know when or where it landed exactly because they haven't found the crater, as far as I know. The main mass of the meteorite was found in a riverbed, and they went back and explored the area and found other pieces of it also in the riverbed. Originally, they thought it was just a purely iron meteorite, but when they found later pieces of it, they found what's called Pallasite, which is a stony iron meteorite. So there are 3 kinds of meteorites. There's iron, and there's stony, which are made out of rock, either the crust of one of those larger meteorites, or a meteoroid rather, or a meteoroid that wasn't large enough to have its own internal gravity, and so the rock and there's still iron composite, spread through the rock. The third kind is stony iron, and they are formed right at the border of that iron core in a large meteoroid, where the rock is pressing down on the iron, and it actually crystallizes some of the rock against the iron or into the iron. They're called olivine crystals, and it's actually Peridot, which is the birthstone for August. So when you show that piece, and let me see, this is a piece of the fucking Pallasite, Fuking from China. But, and this is huge, right? That one's like 10 inches on the side. Ours is like 1.5 inches or 2 inches on the side, so it's much smaller. And it comes in a little red case, and I usually just keep it in my pocket. And I only take it out because we dropped it and broken it once. It's very delicate. I don't take it out very often. I only take it out when I feel like the group of people I'm talking to are really excited about meteorites, or really feel like this is a special thing. This is another one where if you're away from the telescopes, it's really nice to turn on the white light and be able to shine it underneath so that they can see the crystals glowing through the bright light. But this is basically what it looks like. It's a bunch of olivine crystals, a bunch of peridot sitting in an iron matrix. And if you look carefully at that iron matrix on one side, you can see the dark and light alloys of iron and nickel. that are formed by Whitman sun patterns, but they're at a different angle than the slice, so you don't see the geometric patterns. They actually look much more organic. Yeah, so that's that piece. The last piece Tom keeps with him all the time, and it's a chunk of Mars. And so if things are really special, like Tom will pull this piece out and let people touch the piece of Mars. But that's the fourth piece of meteorite. And like I said, I never carry that around. That's Tom all the time. So I just carry the other three. All right. So I think that's everything pretty much. So questions that people ask me, how expensive, or where do we get the meteorite? We bought them on eBay through a meteorite dealer, but on eBay. Can I get meteorite? Yes, go to eBay or onto the internet. Just make sure that you use a qualified dealer that has certification through International Astronomical Society or whatever. And the meteorites will come with certification to show that they are really meteorites. So people will ask that. Let me see, what else have people asked me? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But there's always questions. How do we date the meteorites? When they land, the landing sites are usually dated by carbon, like burned trees or plant life that's underneath the meteorites, and we can carbon date that. The meteorites themselves, we use a different kind of, and forgive me, I'm not 100% sure on the correct scientific language, but I generally just say radioisotope dating. But from the iridium, for instance, we know what the half-life decay of iridium is. And so we can look at the iridium in the meteorite and be able to figure out how old it is. And because it was floating out in space, it's been affected by a certain amount of cosmic radiation from the sun that doesn't hit us because we're underneath the Van Allen belts. And so we can tell how long stuff has been floating in space too. Like Tom's meteorite, the Mars meteorite, they're pretty confident it's like between 14 and 16 million years ago that had an impact on Mars, and the piece was blown out into space off the surface of Mars, floated through space for 14 million years or so until it was. Yeah. Any other questions? You guys want to ask me questions? Yeah, ask.
Okay. So number one, what do you carry them around in while you're working the line? And number two, where do they live when you're not carrying them around, or we aren't?
That's a very good question. Okay, so the big one I usually just carry in my hand because I'm handing it off to people all the time. The other two, the slice is only about maybe 5 inches long and about 3 inches wide, and it kind of shaped like a boomerang. So I just put that in one of my pockets. And the Pallasite is even smaller, and we have like a little red business card case, and it sits inside the little red business card case, and I just put that in my pocket too. Okay. There is a white satchel, shoulder satchel, like a NASA white satchel, and the meteorites in the past have all gone into that satchel. There's a wooden box now with a cylindrical box with a curved door on the front of it that Tom puts the big meteorite in, and so I'll put it back in there. At the burn, I was usually handing them off to the next person because I worked a lot of the 8 to midnight shift or 9 to 1 a.m. shift. Mm-hmm. But if you are working the last shift in the morning, we put them into Tin Man's Dome, which gets locked. So they go back into Tin Man's Dome, they get locked, and I'll ping Tom and make sure he has that white satchel around or has something significant to put it in, so it'll be easy to find for the next person at night when they come out to the dome. The only thing that was problematic last year was that sometimes the people who showed up to work at 9 o'clock didn't have the key to Tin Man's Dome.
Yeah, that's the other question then.
Yeah.
Who the hell has
that key? So Tom has that key, and he's supposed to hand it off to whoever's going to be working the scope or the guardian. There might be more than one key, but usually it's going to be either the primary scope operator or the guardian who's going to have the key.
Okay.
And that's another thing that we need to make sure is super organized when we go out to the burn. That's one of those things that,
Just to interrupt real quick, this meeting might end in less than a minute apparently, but I think I can restart another one that just chops it into hour chunks. So I mean, I'll start another one anyway, and then we can.
Sure. Do you want to just put the link back into the Black Rock Observatory and to that same comment into the Black Rock Observatory Facebook page? I think we all have access to that, right?
If anybody doesn't show up, thanks for
thanks
for listening, and we'll see you in 5 seconds.
Yeah. Hopefully, I didn't go too fast, but like I said, I'm recording it.
That was great.
So yeah, and I think you're recording it too, Rob.
I am.
So we'll put our tapes up so you guys can watch it over again. Also, in the document that I'm going to post, I put a bunch of links to web pages about the meteorites.
Cool.
And about Whitman Sutton patterns. There's something people ask me about. Has anybody ever been killed by a meteorite? We get hit by meteorites, and I talk to people about this. We get hit by meteorites between 500 and 1,000 times every 24 hours. The vast majority of those meteorites are the size of a grain of sand. And if you look up in the sky and see those streaks that only last a short time, those are little tiny meteorites. But you can still see those streaks 60 miles up because that's how fast and hard they're hitting the Earth's atmosphere, right? Meteorites that size, I'm confident that this is going to go away in a second. So,
leaving a cliffhanger.
Yeah, and then have to come back for the rest of the story.
All right, leave a cliffhanger.
So so we get hit by meteorites 500 to 1,000 times every night, or every day, every 24-hour period. But like I said, the vast majority of them are very small. It's actually very rare for meteorites to be large enough that they hit the ground without be still burning as they hit the ground. Most meteorites are small enough that as they enter the atmosphere, they burn for just a second or so, a very short period of time, and then the friction as they're coming through the atmosphere slows them down to the point where the compression wave evaporates, they are floating, and they just kind of drift down to Earth. And the thing is, our planet is 70% water, so 2/3 or more of these meteorites land in the ocean. Of the ones that land on the land, more than 1/3 of the land mass of the Earth is desert and not inhabited by humans. And so a lot of that stuff lands out in the desert, which is why when you watch that TV show Meteorite Men and they're out hunting meteorites, they're always out in the middle of butt-ass nowhere, right? There have been a couple of notable finds where people actually see stuff come down. The biggest one is the one that landed in Russia a couple of years ago, where they had all the dashboard cams, and you actually saw that thing coming in. That one broke up in the atmosphere. There was an airburst. Chunks of it fell all over the place, but outside of town, it actually still landed out in a fairly uninhabited area. There weren't injuries associated with that meteor, but not from the meteor itself, but from the shockwave. People ran to their windows and were looking out their windows to see what was coming in, and the shockwave hit and shattered glass, and so people got cut up and stuff. We only know about one incident of a person getting hit by a meteorite that's been confirmed, and I put a link about that in the document. Let me see if I can remember the woman's name. Actually, I'll just look up the document. Let me see. It was a woman in, I don't actually remember. Well, anyway, it was a woman in like Idaho or Iowa in the 50s or someplace like that, and it came through the roof of her house here in the leg, if I remember the story correctly. And she survived. It wasn't a big deal. I don't know this for a fact, but I like to tell people that she kept the meteorite on her mantelpiece for the rest of her life. It just is a funny anecdote. Whether or not it's true, I have no idea. I just made it up. So the other unconfirmed meteor strike of a person is in India, and supposedly a guy got hit and killed in the beginning of 2016, like last February. there's no real confirmation of that, and the crater impact site doesn't look like something that came from outer space. So it's entirely possible that he just got hit by a chunk of like airplane, or maybe somebody hit him in the head with a rock because they didn't like him. You know, we're not really sure. So other than those two, there have been no reported instances of anybody ever being struck down.